Hello student, Jai Swaminarayan. Today we continue with the fundamentals of remote sensing, orbits and SWATs. What to understand by orbit? The path followed by a satellite in space is referred to as its orbit. That means जिस path में वो घूमता है, satellite घूमता है, that is space में. Okay, space में जिस पाथ में वो घूमता है दैट इज कॉल्ड ऑर्बिट. द प्लेन इन विच द सैटेलाइट मूव इज नोन एज ए ऑर्बिटल प्लेन. दैट मीन जिस प्लेन में घूमता है दैट इज कॉल्ड ऑर्बिटल प्लेन. द ऑर्बिटल प्लेन कंटेनिंग द इक्वेटर इज टर्म एज equatorial plane, and the angle between the satellite orbital plane and the earth equatorial plane is termed as the inclination of the orbit. Okay, this one is called equator, this one is called equatorial plane. Okay, and this one is called orbital plane. Okay, the inclination of the equatorial orbital plane is 0 degree when the inclination is 90 degree. The satellite moves over the poles, that is center of the earth. That means जब भी 90 डिग्री एंगल होता है तो सैटेलाइट मूव्स ओवर द पोल्स. पोल्स जो भी होता है वहां पे वो मूव करता है. ओके, moves over the poles, and that is the center of the earth. North pole and south pole lies in the orbital plane. This is called the polar orbits. If the inclination is close to 90 degree, if the inclination is close to 90 degree, it is called near polar orbits. Satellite orbits are matches to the capability and objective of the sensor they carry. Satellite orbits are matched to the capability and objective of the sensors they carry. Orbit selection can vary in terms of their altitude, ओरिएंटेशन, रोटेशन रिलेटिव टू द अर्थ. दैट मीन्स इसमें क्या होता है कि किस डायरेक्शन में हम अच्छे से फोटोग्राफ खींच सकते हैं वो ध्यान में रख के ये सब उसका कितना इंक्लिनेशन होना चाहिए, ओके, सैटेलाइट का, वो सब डिसाइड करते हैं. ओके, उसके रिलेटेड ये सब इंक्लिनेशन होता है. द ऑर्बिटल पीरियड ऑफ ए सैटेलाइट कैन बी कैलकुलेटेड फ्रॉम द फॉलोइंग इक्वेशन. ओके, T is equal to under root 4 pi square r cube divided by gm central. Then r is the earth radius plus orbital altitude from the earth's surface. G is the universal gravitational constant. Then m constant mass of the central body about with the satellite orbits. Then concept of SWATH. As the satellite revolves around the sensor, okay, this one is called sensor. The satellite revolves around the earth. The sensor sees a certain portion of the earth. Okay, in a satellite system, the total width of the area on the ground covered by the scanner is called the SWAT. SWAT, that means जो भी एरिया कवर होता है सैटेलाइट से, जो भी एरिया कवर होता है, ओके, सैटेलाइट पे जो सेंसर लगा होता है उससे जो जितना भी एरिया कवर होता है दैट इज कॉल्ड SWAT. Imaging SWAT for the space-borne sensors generally vary between tens and hundreds of kilometers. Wide SWAT depends on various features like how many detectors are there in the sensor, spatial resolution, orbital altitudes, etc. High altitude means larger area. High altitude, that means what? जितना ऊंचा होगा उतना large area cover होगा. ओके, जितना नजदीक होगा उतना कम एरिया कवर होगा. ओके, कैमरा में भी आप जितना दूर जाते हो तो एरिया ज्यादा कवर होता है, और नजदीक से फोटो खींचते हो तो एरिया कम कवर होता है. इसी तरह सेंसर में भी होता है. Higher altitude means larger areas can be observed by the sensor, useful for measuring the ground features, providing with what is known as a synoptic view. Okay. Orbital calendar. Orbital calendar gives information about the satellite's path and its timing. Since The satellite rotates with different path on different days. It is essential to know the position of the satellite at a particular day. For example, in case of resource SAT-1, it has 341 orbits in 24 days cycle. Okay, hence on any given day it is possible to determine orbit which will trace designed path. If the path is known, then it is possible to find out day on which the data may be captured using the reference scheme. That means जो भी उसका पाथ होता है, जो भी उसका ऑर्बिट होता है, ओके, किस डे पे किस टाइम पे कहाँ पे था, उसकी वजह से हमें क्या, किसका डेटा होगा, किस डेट का डेटा होगा, ओके, वो किस डे का डेटा होगा और किस टाइम वो फोटोग्राफ वगैरह खींचा होगा, वो हमें पता चलता है। ओके, तो इसीलिए हमें उसका टाइम और उसका पाथ जानना जरूरी होता है कि वो किस पाथ पे घूम रहा है, ओके, वो किस ऑर्बिट में घूम रहा है, ओके, और किस पाथ में घूम रहा है, उसकी वजह से हमें किस डेट का और टाइम का डेटा होगा वो पता चले। डेटा मे बी कैप्चर्ड यूजिंग द रेफरेंस स्कीम। डे, किस डे पे वो डेटा खींचा होगा वो पता चल सकता है। Hence, the orbital calendar can be used for the analysis of the temporal changes after knowing the path and timing of the satellite and to capture the data for the temporal analysis. The next one is data acquisition and recording. Remote sensing techniques. Remote sensing utilizes satellites and airborne based sensor to collect the information about a given object or area. रिमोट सेंसिंग डेटा, दैट मीन्स वो क्या यूज करता है, सैटेलाइट और सेंसर दोनों का यूज होता है, दैट इज कॉल्ड एयरबॉर्न सेंसर्स। एयरबॉर्न बेस सेंसर जो भी होते हैं उसका यूज करता है। रिमोट सेंसिंग डेटा कलेक्शन मेथड कैन बी पैसिव और एक्टिव। पैसिव सेंसर दैट इज स्पेक्ट्रल इमेजर्स then detect natural radiation that is emitted and reflected by the object or area being observed. In active remote sensing, radar energy is emitted and the resultant signal that is reflected back is measured. Active remote sensing sensors provide their own energy source. They emit a beam of energy directed toward the target of the interest and then measure the reflected or backscattered signals, and the time is taken for the signal to return is measured. That means कितना टाइम लगता है वो जो भी रे है उसको वापस आने में, ओके, तो वो मेजर होता है, मेजर्ड एज वेल एज अ सिंगल एम्पलीट्यूड एंड वेवलेंथ, ओके, उसका एम्पलीट्यूड और वेवलेंथ दोनों मेजर होता है। बाय मेजरिंग द टाइम डिले बिटवीन द सिग्नल एमिशन एंड रिटर्न, द लोकेशन, स्पीड, डायरेक्शन ऑफ द टारगेट कैन बी डिटरमाइंड. Radar and lidar are the most commonly used active remote sensing techniques. Light detection and ranging is an active remote sensing technique that uses the optical measurements of the scattered light to find the range. Okay, measurements can be made from the aircraft or land-based sensor. Distance to the object is determined by the time delay between the transmission and detection of the laser pulses. The distance to the object, okay, कितना है वो डिटरमाइन करना है, तो टाइम डिले बिटवीन द ट्रांसमिशन एंड डिटेक्शन ऑफ द लेजर पल्सेस, दैट मीन्स कितना टाइम एमिट होता है, कितना टाइम उसको रिटर्न होने में लगता है, एमिशन टाइम और रिटर्न टाइम, ओके, जो भी टाइम है उसका डिफरेंस करते हैं तो हमें क्या मिलेगा, between the transmission and the detection of the laser pulses, okay, उससे मिलता है टाइम डिले between the transmission and detection of a laser pulse. It is accurate to within 0.1 meter at 1 meter resolution, 0.3 meter at 3 meter resolution, and has the ability to measure the land surface elevation beneath the vegetation canopy. Vegetation canopy है, उसके नीचे लैंड सरफेस एलिवेशन कितना है वो भी मेजर कर सकता है. Radar is an active sensor remote sensing tool used to detect the small changes in the ground movement at the geothermal location. और ऑल्सो जियोथर्मल लोकेशन क्या क्या है, मतलब तो अर्थ के नीचे जो भी हीट है, ओके, इनसाइड द अर्थ, उसका लोकेशन जानना है, उसका मूवमेंट जानना है. चेंजेस इन द ग्राउंड, ग्राउंड मूवमेंट एट, ग्राउंड मूवमेंट क्या हो रहा है एट जियोथर्मल लोकेशन, दैट मीन्स जो भी हीट रिलेटेड है, अर्थ में भी नीचे लावा वगैरह होता है, ओके, तो उसके रिलेटेड क्या ग्राउंड मूवमेंट क्या हो रही है वो भी हमें जानना हो, ओके, ज्वालामुखी जिसको बोलते हैं, ओके. अर्थ के अंदर भी क्या होता है, हीट होता है, तो हीट के रिलेटेड, हीट से ग्राउंड मूवमेंट कैसी होती है, स्मॉल चेंजेस इन द ग्राउंड मूवमेंट, दैट मीन्स ग्राउंड मूवमेंट में कौन कौन सी चेंजेस हो रहे हैं वो हमें जानना है, तो उसके लिए रडार यूज होता है. Then light detection and ranging is an active remote sensing technology that uses optical measurement of the scattered light to find the range. Measurement can be made from the aircraft or land-based sensors. Okay, so is an active remote sensing technology that uses optical measurements of the scattered light to find the range. Optical measurements of scatter light to find the range. Measurements can be made from the aircraft. Aircraft पे से measurement लेते हैं और land based sensors का use करके हम measurement लेते हैं. Distance to an object is determined by the time delay between the transmission and detection of the laser pulses. Land surface elevation beneath the laser pulses, it is accurate to within 0.1 meter and has ability to measure the land surface elevation beneath the vegetation canopy. Then radar is an active sensor remote sensing tool used to detect small changes in the ground movement at the geothermal location. Okay. Then radio detection and ranging is used to wide variety of application. In remote sensing application, the source of radio waves is from satellites, and the signals are bounced off of the Earth's surface to determine the precise distance from the satellite to the ground. The amount of the time it takes for the radio signal to return to the satellite is measured, and then the distance can be calculated by taking a number of the measurements over a period of time. Precise ground movement can be determined. Passive remote sensors detect the energy that occurs naturally in the environment. वास्ट मेजोरिटी पैसिव रिमोट सेंसिंग में क्या है कि भाई आप सन जो भी नेचुरली अवेलेबल सोर्स है उसमें से एनर्जी यूज करके जो भी एनर्जी एमिट होता है वो रिफ्लेक्ट होता है, उसको कितना टाइम लगता है उस ओके वो सब फाइंड करके जो भी इमेजेस है, ओके, अर्थ रिलेटेड वो जो भी सेंसर है, ओके, वो सेंस उसके रिलेटेड वो इमेजेस सेंस करता है. दैट मीन्स कितना उसको ऑब्जेक्ट पे गिरने में, ऑब्जेक्ट के से रिटर्न होने में कितना टाइम लगता है, उस पे से वो इमेजेस वगैरह क्रिएट करता है. इन द एनवायरमेंट द वास्ट majority of the energy is in the form of electromagnetic waves reflected of the earth from the sun. Photographs taken from the satellite, which are essentially measured of the reflected sunlight, are the most common source of the electromagnetic waves measured by the passive sensors. Aerial photography. Aerial photography involves taking the photos from the elevated platforms such as manned or remote control aircraft और हेलीकॉप्टर. ओके, तो एरियल फोटोग्रामेट्री आपको सर्वेइंग में एक सब्जेक्ट था, एक टॉपिक था, वो इन लोगों ने निकाल दिया है. एरियल फोटोग्रामेट्री के बारे में पहले भी मैंने डिस्कस किया है कि भाई कोई भी हमें फोटोग्राफ वगैरह मैप कोई भी हमें प्रिपेयर करना है तो हमें उसके लिए एयरक्राफ्ट में कैमरा रखना पड़ेगा, और वो कैमरा क्या करेगा, फोटोग्राफ खींच जो भी एरिया का हमें मैप चाहिए, जो भी सिटी का मैप चाहिए उसको उसका फोटोग्राफ खींचे। पूरा एरिया तो कवर नहीं होगा, बट जो भी एरिया कवर हो रहा है उसमें ओवरलैपिंग भी रखना पड़ता है। ओके, वो ओवरलैपिंग फोटोग्राफ्स खींच के हमें क्या करना पड़ेगा, उस सभी फोटोग्राफ को कंबाइन करना पड़ेगा इन कंप्यूटर बाय यूजिंग जीआईएस, और वो सब करके हम क्या प्रिपेयर कर सकते हैं, मैप प्रिपेयर कर सकते हैं। और इसके लिए दूसरा इंस्ट्रूमेंट भी आता है, दैट इज कॉल्ड स्टीरियोस्कोप, उसकी मदद से भी हम ये कर सकते हैं। देन FLIR, forward looking infrared cameras typically used on the military and the civilian aircraft use an imaging technology that senses infrared radiation at wavelength between 3 to 12 micrometers. Hyperspectral imaging. Hyperspectral sensors collect data across a wide range of the spectrum. Okay, VNIR, LWIR plus GIR and small spectral resolution and high spatial resolution 1 to 5 meter. This allows detailed spectral signature to be identified for the different imaged materials. For example, hyperspectral imaging can be used to identify the specific clay minerals. Then multispectral imaging can identify only the presence of clay minerals in general. Okay, the मल्टीस्पेक्ट्रल इमेजिंग क्या करेगा, ओनली क्ले मिनरल्स कौन से है वो फाइंड आउट करेगा। ओके, बट वो क्ले मिनरल्स में जो भी for example hyperspectral imaging can be used to identify the specific clay minerals। वो स्पेसिफिक क्ले मिनरल्स है, कौन सा है, क्या है, वो फाइंड आउट करेगा। पर मल्टीस्पेक्ट्रल क्या है, वो कौन सा क्ले मिनरल है वो फाइंड आउट करेगा। पर डीप में जाना हो तो क्या करना पड़ेगा, हाइपरस्पेक्ट्रल इमेजिंग यूज करना पड़ेगा। देन लो वेव इंफ्रारेड। Long wave infrared refers to multi and hyperspectral data collected in 8 to 15 micrometer wavelength range. LWIR surveys are sometimes referred to as a thermal imaging and can be used to identify relatively warm features such as hot springs, then film rolls and snow melts, etc. LWIR can also be used to map the distribution of the certain minerals related to the hydrothermal alteration. Then multispectral imaging. Multispectral surveys image the earth in an average of 10 wide bands over a wide spectral range. Multispectral sensors measure the electromagnetic spectrum in discrete discontinuous bands. Unlike the continuous hyperspectral image, the multispectral sensors are capable of relative material delineation. The thermal wavelength range of the multispectral survey senses heat energy from the Earth's surface, and it can be used to sense the surface temperature, including the anomalies associated with the active geothermal and volcanic systems. Remote sensing data. Remotely sensed satellite data comes in two basic types: passively collected data or actively collected data. Passive data collection focuses on acquiring the intensity of the electromagnetic radiation generated by the sun and reflected off the surface of the planet. Active data collection is largely restricted to devices that send and generate pulses of energy to that is reflected back to the satellite to be recorded. Most of the readily available data is passively collected and is limited to energy not absorbed by the Earth atmosphere. Satellite imagery based on the passive reflectivity comes in four basic types, which are visible, infrared, multispectral and hyperspectral. Remote sensing data. The remote sensing satellite data comes in two basic types: passively collected data or actively collected data. Passively data collection focusing on acquiring the intensity and electromagnetic radiation generated by the reflected off the surface of the planet. Active data collection is largely restricted to the devices that send and generate a pulse of the energy to the reflected back to the satellite to be recorded. That means the satellite से जो भी रेज एमिट होता है वो वापस रिफ्लेक्ट करके जो भी आता है रिफ्लेक्शन वो इसका जो भी रिफ्लेक्शन होता है उस पर से एक इमेज मिलती है. ओके, दैट इज कॉल्ड एक्टिव that is called actively collected data. Most of the readily available data is passively collected and is limited to energy not absorbed by the Earth's atmosphere, and satellite imagery based on the passive reflectivity comes in four basic types, which are visible, infrared, multispectral, then hyperspectral activity. The type and the resolution of the data that is collected is generally keyed to the mission of the satellite. Visible data consists of uh, pixels composed of color values of red, green, blue to make the three bands of the data on a raster image. Infrared imagery usually consists of the images that include the visible channels as well as some range of the infrared spectrum. Multispectral data includes up to 7 to 12 channels of the data, and hyperspectral can be up to 50 bands or more of data collected over the discrete bandwidth of the electromagnetic spectrum. Data obtaining during the airborne remote sensing missions can be retrieved once the aircraft lands. It can then be processed and delivered to the end users, and however data acquired from the satellite platforms need to be electronically transmitted to the Earth, and since the satellite continues to stay in orbit during the operational lifetime, the technology is designed to accomplish this can also be used by the aerial platform if the data are urgently needed on the surface. There are three main options for transmitting data acquired by the satellite to the surface. The data can be directly transmitted to the Earth if a ground receiving station is in the line of sight of the satellite. If this is not the case, the data can be recorded on board the satellite and data relay satellites on board. If it is not the case, the data can be recorded on board the satellite, and for the transmission to the GRS at a later time, data can also be relayed to the GRS through the tracking and data relay satellite system, which consists of series of communication satellites in geosynchronous orbit, and the data are transmitted from the open satellite to another until they reach the appropriate GRS, which consists of the data are received at a GRS in a raw digital format, and they may then, if required, be processed to correct systematic geometric and atmospheric distortion to the इमेजिनरी. दैट मीन्स डिस्टॉर्शन का मतलब क्या है कि जो उसकी ओरिजिनल साइज है उसमें थोड़ा साइज कम होता है, दैट इज कॉल्ड डिस्टॉर्शन. फॉर एग्जांपल, आप ऊपर से फोटो खींच रहे हो, एग्जैक्टली जो भी प्लान है उसके ऊपर से फोटो खींच रहे हो तो उसमें कोई डिस्टॉर्शन नहीं आएगा, पर कोई इंक्लिनेशन पे आप फोटो खींच रहे हो तो उसकी जो ओरिजिनल साइज है उसमें चेंज होगा, दैट इज कॉल्ड डिस्टॉर्शन. The data is returned to some form of the storage medium such as tap, disk or CD, and the data is typically achieved to most achieving and processing stations, and full libraries of the data are managed by the government agencies as well as the commercial companies responsible for each sensor's achieve. Remote sensing data products. There are two types of data used in informatics. One is raster data and other is one is vector data. When we talk of remote sensing data, we always mean raster data. In its simplest form, a raster data means data consisting of matrix of cells or pixels organized in row and columns, where each cell contains the value representing the information such as reflected electromagnetic radiation, temperature, height values, etc. Okay, the raster data products include digital aerial photographs, imagery from the satellite, digital pictures, even scan maps that is included into the vector data. Raster data, sorry. The data from the various sensors are presented in form and the format with specified radiometric and geometric accuracy, which can be readily used by various application scientists for the scientific terms of their interest. Remote sensing data can be procured by a number of the users for the various applications and information extraction in the form of the data product. This may be in the form of the photographic output for the virtual processing or in a digital formal amiable for the further computer processing. There are varieties of the remote sensing data which are acquired by the different sensors and satellites. Before reaching to the users, the data undergoes some processing steps and the requirements of the users may vary depending upon their interest and project objectives. Hence, there are various remote sensing data providers, suppliers which prepare variety of the data products at different formats. Okay. Remote sensing data products are generated in certain data format about which the users must be aware of for various practical reasons. Pre-processed remote sensing data are generated into a number of the products like hard copy prints on various types of papers, digital forms or digital data, or various types of computer compatible media like tabs, compact discs, DVDs, various other computer compatible storage devices. If the data product is hard copy print, then it is impossible to carry out any further processing or conventional before use and but if the product is in digital form, it may be possible to convert the data into the processed digital image. It may be further required to carry out a certain processing before an image analysis operation is performed. They of data product may vary from country to country, then country to country, and or from one data provider to another. However, here an account of account is given about the various data products made available in India to users by the National Data Center of the National Remote Sensing Centers of the Indian Space Research Organization ISRO, situated at the Hyderabad. Okay, thank you.